Good evening, friends, and a very warm welcome in this cold weather of Delhi. Today, we have with us Dr. Radha Kapuria. She is lecturer of South Asian history in the University of Durham. Her, her recent book has come out from Oxford University Press in 2023. Social History of Music in Colonial Punjab, Courtesans, Bards, and Connoisseurs. In addition to that, Radha has written for many prestigious journals like the Indian Economic and Social History Review, Modern Asian Studies, South Asian Diaspora, and many more. In 2023, she has edited, along with Priyanka Basu, a special issue of South Asia, the Journal of South Asian Studies, on ecology, community, and performance in South Asia. And she has also edited a volume on Punjab sounds along with Vibhuti Duggal. Today, Radha is going to talk about Mirasis. And she would be talking about how Mirasis were reflected, to how Mirasis were discussed in various colonial ethnographic sources, along with a text written by a Muslim official in Gujranwala town. She would be talking about a text called Mirasinamah. So now I would invite Radha to speak.
Thank you, Naresh. I've asked Ayodhya ji to please share the slides. And the presentation today is called Mirasis, Music and Modernity in Colonial Punjab. But I will, of course, use some examples from contemporary Punjab as well. And yes, if we pressed enter, that would be, it will go on to show us an image of a neighborhood in Lahore. That's okay. I think we can move to the next slide. Yeah. So the Mirasis are a lineage-based nomadic hereditary caste group of genealogists and musicians traditionally endowed with low social status in Punjab. Like many communities of musicians across space and time, the Mirasis were socially liminal, routinely crossing boundaries of class and community. If we move to the next slide, we see a popular proverb which captures the fear inspired by the Mirasi. It says, "Jutti soti to bagair na turiye raat nu, teacher na kariye Mirasi jaat nu." Do not roam around at night without your shoes or stick, and do not tease or mess with those of the Mirasi caste. And if we move to the next slide, this quirky proverb which captures fear is also captured in Prakash Tandon's memoir Punjabi Century, where he describes the Mirasis. Now, of course, Prakash Tandon came from an upper caste Khatri background, and his description of the Mirasi says that the Mirasi's wit was inherited down the generations, practiced from childhood, was sharp, very quick, at times brilliant. And most importantly, he said, woe betide a man who tried to retaliate and get the better of them, for they could reduce him to rags before a company. So this is the kind of social function which Mirasis play, which inspires the fear amongst upper caste patrons. And he goes on to say that the word Mirasi in the Punjabi language has come to mean witty and funny in an overdone, vulgar manner. unquote. So this is a quote from 1961, which is several years ago. And still today in the Punjabi language, there is a negative caste association to anyone who tries to pursue the profession of a musician. This is the kind of censure they receive, especially if they come from upper caste or middle caste background. But I think the first time, perhaps in recent history, that the Mirasis became a focus of attention was in the colonial period. So if we see the next slide, there is an image of the Indian Nights Entertainment, published in 1892 by the colonial scholar administrator, Reverend Charles Swinnerton, who also served in Africa at some point of time. But this is just one representative example of a lot of colonial interest by colonial folklorists in the Mirasis, because the Mirasis, as we know, are the repository of the folklore of the region. And so perhaps this was the first time in recent history that the Mirasis became the center of attention, and they had many of these colonial scholar administrators. Of course, the most famous is Richard Temple, Legends of the Punjab. You have Flora Annie Steele as well, and many such examples. And they sort of would seek out the Mirasis to note down the stories and tales. But as Sadhna Nethani, the folklorist and sociologist, has said, they treated, especially people like Richard Temple, treated the Mirasis mainly as push-button repositories. And almost nowhere in these texts are the Mirasis mentioned by name or identified as individuals. It's only what they speak and sing that is of interest to these 19th century colonial folklorists. The next image is a woodcut of Mirasi from Swinnerton's accounts. And this is one of the only Mirasis who was mentioned in these colonial accounts. His name is Sharaf. And the image after that is a photograph of Sharaf. So this is the rare archival evidence we have of so-called subalterns surviving in the archives. So if we move to the next slide. But along with this interest in the Mirasi and the Mirasi's knowledge, there was, as we know, in histories of caste in the colonial period. If we see the next slide, we will see how there was a re-entrenchment of caste hierarchies with colonialism in new ways. And for example, if you move to the next slide, we will see that in the government of Punjab, especially for the city of Lahore, the proposed qualifications for municipal committee members in cities like, this is for Multan, but also Multan was following what had happened in Lahore earlier, where Mirasis were debarred from the municipal elections. And in order to serve on the Lahore Municipal Committee in the year 1890, you had to be a male taxpayer, own immovable property valued at a very high price, like 10,000 rupees, and you could not belong to any sect or caste, which was such as Mehtar, Chamar, Butcher, Kanjar, Mirasi, etc., with whom Hindus and Muhammaduddins and also Christians object to mix, unquote. So this is from the government of Punjab order for holding these municipal elections. So colonialism brought with it, as we've just noted, a re-entrenchment of caste hierarchies, even as there is a great amount of social and cultural interest in what the folklore of the Mirasis is. So connecting ethnology with music, however, was not simply a feature of the colonial writing on Punjab. These concerns also undergirded writing of a more vernacular kind, particularly the qissa genre, thriving in Punjab during these decades. In contrast to the discourse of outsiders like Swinnerton, Temple, and others, and missionaries especially, this talk observes music and musicians from the perspective of an insider. And so the qissa I discuss here is the Mirasinamah. Next slide. In essence, a rant against Mirasis, which captures the fear they inspired, which was evident in all the folk proverbs we just saw, The author of this text was one Muhammaduddin police constable who lived in the West Punjabi town of Gujranwala, which is incidentally also happens to be where my grandmother hails from, near Lahore. And he published the Mirasinamah in 1891 in Gujranwala. And many of the things which Prakash Tandon notes in the social function of the Mirasis, like their wit, etc., some of these things are again noted by Muhammaduddin as one of the things that they should be critiqued for. Now, how does this text survive into the present? It's a 19-page document, as we can see, written in Shahamukhi script, but in vernacular, very colorful, body, definitely very colorful and abuse-filled Punjabi. You see the avid British interest in collecting so-called native customs, proverbs, and folklore during these decades, which is 1870s to 1920s, may very well have inspired native interlocutors to write and publish their own documents and booklets in an attempt to cultivate an image of themselves as repositories of local folk knowledges. This is something Niladri Bhattacharya has also discussed in his book on the Great Agrarian Conquest. This kind of connection is borne out in the advertisement for the dissemination of the qissa at the end of the text, which, apart from mentioning the address of its binder in Bazar Kotwali, also states that it's available for purchase from one Abdullah, a student of the entrance class of Gujranwala's Mission High School. So this highlights the overlapping worlds of Christian missionaries and Punjabi police constables also in a provincial setting. The enrollment numbers for this school reveal the largest percentage of students were not Christian, rather they were Hindus and Muslims, respectively comprising the two largest majorities, followed by the Sikhs, and a substantial portion categorized under a very curious head, children of agriculturists. That mission school of the American Presbyterians provides the physical setting for the dissemination of this text, howsoever surreptitiously, given we do not know if Abdullah's teachers or the headmaster approved of its sale on campus, is rather interesting. The very choice of a mission high school could also have been an attempt on Muhammaduddin's part to curry favor with the Gujranwala missionaries, perhaps in a bid to make a positive impression on his British superiors within a colonial setting. These are all things one can guess at. So the voice of this text is rather interesting. It's more nuanced than the European commentators, who also, as Sadhna Naithani has shown, disregard the Mirasi. They, like Temple, in some, Richard Temple calls him a distributable rascal, quote unquote, in some places, which matches the sort of upper caste opprobrium which we have seen in the Proverbs. In this text, in contrast, there is a very different voice, tone, and aim. While the Mirasis have been described amply by a range of interlocutors, from higher caste patrons to colonial ethnographers, it is rare to find any documents from this period written by the Mirasis themselves. This text comes closest to offering us an account of the internal social workings of Mirasi communities, since it was written by someone, I suggest, who had important social proximity to the Mirasis in ways that more elite commentators lacked. And so we see the contours of the popular before it was reformed at a more macro level through an attack by the city-based middle-class upper caste reformers who tried to reform music. They were based in cities like Lahore, Amritsar, Jalandhar. In the foreword to the Mirasinamah, which survives today in the British Library, and this is also interesting because the reason it has perhaps survived in the British Library is because this is seen as evidence for members of the India office who were serving in India way back to show, kind of say, we have evidence to police, surveil, control groups like the Mirasis who are itinerant. So perhaps this is why this kind of text has survived the record. So the British Library catalogue gives the Mirasinamah a very salacious subtitle saying, and exposure of the illegal practices of Mirasis or musicians who instruct dancing girls. Muhammaduddin, the author, uses the term qaum or community to describe the Mirasis, recognizing their status as a hereditary caste of musicians. And this is, at the end of the day, it is a qissa, it is an entertaining story made with the purpose of enlightening the educated notables of the city of Gujranwala regarding the misconduct of some Mirasis, with the hope that those who read it, including some honorable Mirasis themselves, will narrate Muhammaduddin's tale to the entire public. So this is the stated aim in the foreword. The emphasis on retelling his qissa to others refers to the characteristic orality of the qissa as a literary genre. Farina Mir has argued how in colonial Punjab, the qissa emerged as the literary genre par excellence for forging an alternative vernacular literary public sphere to the Urdu one, the more elite Urdu one. In recognition of the power of this print public, it is clear that Muhammaduddin wrote the qissa for oral transmission among the Mirasi community, especially since it was priced at 1 anna, a relatively affordable price for many Mirasis at the time, especially the better off ones. And I would argue the text is aimed at the Mirasis instead of against them, despite the ranty kind of note. It's always lamenting and essentially giving galis to the Mirasis throughout. But I would argue it's aimed at them instead of against them. And it's also a very didactic text. You know, there is a mission, almost a missionary drive to the text, because it had a fairly decent print run for a first edition consisting of 700 copies. And in the afterword, he says, you know, if you buy 100 copies of the qissa, I will give you 20 copies for free, for example. So a good businessman, this Muhammaduddin was. The essential aim is to reform the Mirasis, speaking to them with the aim of reforming them. The underlying assumption is that the critique of the Mirasis can only be in a language which is very colloquial and used in the everyday settings by Mirasis themselves. This is in contrast to the chaste Urdu employed in the foreword and the afterword. And so the text is very colorful body in Punjabi, and it captures Muhammaduddin's attitude towards the Mirasis. You know, the particularly ribald Punjabi employed for the qissa itself indicates his seeming belief that the Mirasis do not deserve to be spoken to in a virtuous or decorous language. Instead, they can only be addressed in the coarse and indelicate register of the Punjabi they themselves presumably use. In that sense, it is a critique invoking the plebeian universe of the Mirasis, radically different from the middle-class reformers who sought to attack them blindly, or the colonial ethnographers who were just interested in studying them within colonial epistemologies. So the Mirasinamah then helps us complicate our understanding of social reform as well, especially if we look very closely at the structure of the author's attack on the Mirasis. The discursive strategies through which Muhammaduddin inscribes evil onto the Mirasis are, and this is my interpretation, what I'm going to say now, it's not a quote verbatim from the text. So things like, you are relentlessly argumentative, clever, and manipulative. You are socially liminal and indiscriminate in your attention to those you service. You are characteristically greedy. You are bad Muslims and inherently evil, having wild animal-like traits. You are sexually licentious and prostitute your women. You are hedonistic with and harass the Kanjaris, a community who are also considered beyond the pale of respectable Islam. And finally, Muhammaduddin is essentially saying, I will demonstrate through this qissa strategies of unraveling and recognizing the methods employed by the Mirasis to so-called cheat everybody. So next slide, the main chorus of the Mirasinamah, which is meant to be repeated at the end of each 4-line stanza, firmly inscribes the Mirasi as a symbol of evil. Baaz Mirasi put shaitan, gal gal denal hujjat sunan. Certain Mirasis are sons of Satan. With every other word, they narrate their argument. Now, this is interesting because qissa, heer, varish, varish as heer also equates the Mirasis to the devil. That this, where he says that the saint of the Mirasis is the devil himself. So this idea कि मिरासियों का पीर शैतान है is recurring even in this qissa. In this, he equates certain, not all Mirasis, Ba's Mirasis, certain Mirasis with the status of Satan's sons on account of their proclivity to argue, hujjat, to argue repeatedly and at every other opportunity. Gal gal denal. The association of the devil is interesting and also correlates to the fact that the header on the frontispiece of the text, which was, if we can go back to the previous slide, is an ayat from the Quran, which is not just any ayat, but it is a prayer for shelter and protection from Satan. I've forgotten what it exactly says, but I remember consulting some friends about this. So next slide. And the slide after this. So Muhammaduddin draws on pre-existing fears of the Mirasis' acerbic wit and powerful intellect. The word hujjat or argument is used frequently throughout the text, lending one to suppose that, it alludes to the opposition Muhammaduddin himself may have faced with the so-called argumentative Mirasis when attempting to convince them to change their behaviors and actions. So in this phrase, he says, Jo koi aggo de jawab, hujjat usnu karan shitab, pave hove shah nawab, lazim majlis which karan or karan. If anybody attempts to answer back, the Mirasis speedily defeat them with their arguments, whether they be shahs or nawabs. The Mirasis are bound to behave so in a gathering. So performance again in the context of a majlis. And this inclination to argue and display anger, the Mirasis' inclination, has also been noted in the Tashri al-Aqwam, which is James Skinner's Persian text from 1825, which lists the different castes and tribes and occupations of Hindustan at that time. And as we noted also with Prakash Tandon. So I think this is really interesting in how the idea of the argumentative Mirasi who argues with anyone, regardless of hierarchy, in a sense, speaking truth to power as well. So the more important takeaway from this is that the Mirasis were also, like many communities of musicians across space and time, but especially the Mirasis of 19th century Punjab, was socially liminal, routinely crossing boundaries of class and community. Catherine Schofield, my PhD supervisor, has noted ways in which during the later Mughal period from the 17th century onwards, the performance of music and dance enabled performers of low social rank to cross the ordinarily impenetrable boundaries of rank and gender, segregating them from the elite, unquote. So this ability often spawned anxiety and fears on behalf of elite patrons and connoisseurs, and it provokes great concern for Muhammaduddin too, though in this case, his anxiety is not around Mirasis crossing the boundary themselves, but in terms of servicing all communities indiscriminately, in particular, joining the Hindus in their religious or festive rituals. His anxieties are tied up with the contemporary wave, this is 1890 after all, contemporary wave of forging a very homogeneous, monolithic religious community, hallmark of late 19th century across North India, but especially colonial Punjab. Now, this is visible in the next couplet, where Muhammaduddin faults the Mirasis for being indiscriminate in servicing all classes and communities. Aisi hai kaum kapatti, deed kise di kare na ratti, pave hove lakhapati, Sayyid Alam Mughal Pathan. Such is this fraudulent community. They do not look at anyone with even the slightest respect, whether they be millionaires or a Sayyid Alam Mughal or Pathan. One of Muhammaduddin's greatest quibbles with the Mirasis is that they lack any clearly defined sense of identity, especially religious identity, ever changing it according to the group they serve. So at one point, he complains that the Mirasis have become like Hindus on account of spending so much of their time servicing them. So the next slide. Na inhanda deen iman, Hindu anal Hindu banjan. Go back. Hindu anal Hindu banjan, Musalmana which Musalman, aise e ahmak nadan. They have neither religion nor honor. With the Hindus, they become Hindus. Among the Muslims, they become Muslim. Such are these innocent dolts. Ahmak nadan. The Mirasinamah thus offers a colloquial perspective censuring the Mirasi communities and delineating how a responsible Mirasi should be different from a dishonorable one. As we can see, it's written by a Punjabi Muslim police constable, and the fact that he's a police constable is part of his name at the beginning of the text. It's not Muhammaduddin, it's Muhammaduddin, police constable. So he had professional proximity to British superiors through the colonial police bureaucracy, at the same time as intimate social proximity to the Mirasis themselves. Arguably, he may also have belonged to a Mirasi family himself, which I will explain in a bit. So it's an example of a low-level comedic vernacular text, replete with rich expletives, which in its very structuring and use of the qissa format testifies also to the ongoing popularity of oral traditions and also the power of the Mirasi, which is why he's so much abuse heaped at them. And it's similar to some of the other popular vernacular texts of this time in its tone and body slant from other parts of India, like the Musaddas Tehniyat Jashn-e-Benazir, written by Mir Ali Jan Sahib in the princely state of Rampur. But to come back to Muhammaduddin, he has a plea that the Mirasis at whom his text is targeted, they should read it before commenting on it and get a hold on what he says, their dancing tongues, which neatly captures, which neatly captures the tussle between orality and literacy, which is also a central tension defining the late 19th century literary sphere in Punjab. Further, the author's frequent invocation of the noble and pious members within the Mirasi community who would endorse his qissa is evidence of the competing ideas about norms of ideal behavior within the community. So I think it's also part of this new wave of textual engagement, which came with the newly buoyant print universe of late 19th century Punjab. So there's this, as I said, orality versus textual and written text tradition. It is a unique text which encapsulates both, quote, the weight of convention for colonial administrators and ethnographers by signifying decades of Indian antipathy toward the Mirasi, while also responding to the contemporary wave of social reform unleashed by the middle classes, which is evident in Muhammaduddin's attack on peripatetic, socially liminal, heterogeneous communities like the Mirasis. And I have included some of the safe for work passages. There are some, especially the primary concern is also to express anger and discomfort at the pernicious acts of the Mirasis, who are seen to possess all possible human vices, from being dishonorable with women to the point of inducing brazenness even in Kanjuri women, to indiscriminately socializing with and of course servicing Hindus, especially with their Hindu counterparts, the Domes, who was another caste. The Dome Mirasi were often mentioned together in colonial records and often had the same function. To not understanding the rudiments of being a good Muslim, indeed even flouting the basic norms of Islam, to disregarding the social differentiation between Mirasi and Kanjuri as a community would be seen as one step lower than the Mirasis. Most of all, of course, being relentlessly argumentative at all times. But of course, such texts were also meant to entertain listeners and readers, to scandalize them in a pleasurable manner, and thus to capitalize on the pleasures which the Mirasis themselves offered as bards, storytellers, musicians. Now, I'm not getting into the details on, their musical acumen. So Muhammaduddin does talk about their role as accompanists, which we can discuss later in the Q&A. I want to wind up the discussion on Mirasinamah by talking about the proximity of Muhammaduddin with the Mirasis and the possible hypothesis that he may have come from a Mirasi background himself. So all throughout the text and in the preface and the afterword, he's eager to not malign all Mirasis through this qissa, given all the almost apologetic prefatory remarks for taking an anti-Mirasi stance. It's almost like, please forgive me, this is not intended for all Mirasis. Some of the Mirasis are actually very noble people, which he keeps saying in the foreword and afterword. He often repeated that his greatest wish in composing the qissa was to be a guide to his friends and a means to prevent the Mirasis from calling themselves Muslims while indulging in un-Islamic acts. So these included vices of making and collecting money illegitimately, of inducting and training dancing women and kanjris into dishonorable acts, basically prostitution, of forgetting the social differences between different communities. And Muhammaduddin is over eager to establish how these acts take Mirasis away from their duty of being Muslim. And it could, as I said, simply be dismissed as a rant. And indeed, in the first reading and the first translation, all I could see was abuse words. But, given the nature of the text, however, it does offer us an unparalleled trove of insights into the powerful role played by Mirasis in every aspect of life in colonial Punjab. And so I think I will just mention one of the very explicit and fairly graphic sections of the text, which describes the ignominious actions of the Mirasis, especially by including a hikayat or a moral lesson featuring a Mirasi sexually harassing his own aunt. So the whole idea of the text is to paint the Mirasi as deplorable and uncivilized in every possible way. This is him indulging in incest. So the sketching of the Mirasi as the central demon is the kind of aim of the text. But I think there's a tension, apart from orality and textuality, there is a tension also in the text between its stated pure, reformist and religious-minded intention and the liberal use of colorful abusive words or graphic details about sexual harassment carried out by the Mirasi at one point. It is hard to ignore the possibility that by describing such hedonistic acts of the Mirasi, the author seems to be living vicariously through his subject, and by imagining or fantasizing the full extent of the Mirasi's misdeeds. If the Mirasi was a key part of everyday life of rural Punjabi society, then writing the Mirasinamah in a colloquial register used by the Mirasis themselves could be read as a classic example of a desertuan tactic employed by reformers like Muhammaduddin to disrupt the power and prominence enjoyed by them in this quotidian life. I'm going to now conclude this text by just a few more kind of examples. So if we see the next slide, he says, Dil vich shauk rakhi je mera, tenu duja dasa dera, sorry. Police lane vich pai phera, knocker vich police de jaan. So if your heart is fond of me and my message, I tell you another home of mine. Come take a round in the police lines, not the civil lines, police lines, and become a servant in the police. So that is, it's an interesting kind of recruitment drive angle to this, which also says that perhaps he himself came from a similar social background and he thinks he has progressed professionally by joining the colonial bureaucracy. Slide. Again, this is the example of, showing us the social proximity. Main koi bura na kehya burao. Bravo, sorry. It's been a long time, I apologize. Mat mere te khafa ho jao. Kehna manno te baaz aa jao. Kar tauba ho Musalman. I have not said anything bad, oh brothers. Do not be angry with me. Listen to me and mend your ways. Kar tauba ho Musalman, repent, and then you can become Muslim, or a true Muslim. And next slide again. Now, this is interesting, where he's saying that some of these Mirasis are actually good. E ikko jehe nahi sare, which hain Allah de pyare. Arif Zahid Munis bhare, padhe namaza te Quran. So this is his kind of exit, like disclaimer, to say that they are all not the same. Within them are hidden those who are dear to Allah, such as the knowledgeable, the pious, and the companions of Allah, and those who read the namaz and the Quran. And this is an interesting statement, because if you look at all the ethnographies of Mirasis and all the, whether it's ethnomusicology or its historical accounts, there is no agreement on what exactly or who was a Mirasi. There are different Mirasis in different parts of Punjab and North India. And so there's hierarchies also within Mirasis, which we can discuss later. And finally, the last slide says, this is the afterword, where he says, he makes it a point to clarify that his qissa has not been written with the purpose of maligning all Mirasis. ये किस्सा तमाम मिरासियों के पर खिलाफ नहीं बनाया है, but only against those particular ones who have indulged in evil deeds despite being Muslim, जिन्होंने दीन मोहम्मदी में होकर अफाल बदअख्तियार किए. So this is clearly like saying that please don't hate me. Clearly, the reason he's so eager to, not displease the Mirasis shows you that there are friends in whom he's afraid of kind of upsetting. So final slide on the Mirasinamah. पढ़ के कहना बुरा भला, पहले करनी बंद जुबान. So condemn or praise after reading the text, first control your tongue. And clearly this fear of the argumentative Mirasi who have dancing tongues is the great problem. If we move to the next slide, we can see the contrast of the Mirasinamah with the contemporary. The same time you have texts like this written in Hindi in cities like Lahore as well, similar context. Abla Mati Vegrodhik Sangeet. So songs for chaste-minded or weak-minded rather women. This is written by, this is Arya Samaj. All of these examples are of Arya Samaji bhajans written for women. A very important text is on, these are all from educational institutions like Kanya Mahavidyalaya. And the image there is of Devki Sood, who is a photo from 1932 from Amritsar. She wrote a book in Hindi on music. And Change Change Punjabi Geet was written by Gurandita Khanna, who was the biographer of Pandit Paluskar. That text is again from the 30s, so it has a nationalist slant. But in most of these texts, there is a lot of abuse reserved for the Mirasis in the foreword. That, this is music is Dev Vidya. It is something the upper castes have let it fall, so quote unquote, into the hands of the Mirasi. So next slide. Is a very famous text from so-called Punjab Purity Association, a text called Opinions on the Notch Question. And they literally amongst many people who gave their opinions, which included Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, all men, and also because it's on the Notch Question, so it's anti-dancing girl and anti-tawaif. But there is a lot of abuse reserved for Mirasis who are viewed as a nuisance, given that, quote, their company is very seldom of a wholesome character. Association of music with the Mirasis, a degraded class of people, of persons, made even respectable persons ashamed to avow their knowledge of music and to even confess their taste for it. So this is the kind of very removed, aloof, distant censuring of the Mirasi, which is very different from the nuance we see in the Mirasinamah. If we move forward, there is a slide of Ashwini Kumar, who was the man who modernized the Harvallabh festival of Jalandhar. And if we see the next slide, he shared with me in an interview, and I think with whoever interviewed him, he would tell this story. And I think Naresh has been the first one to interview him. So if we move to the next slide, he said that our father, who was apparently one of the first medical doctors from Punjab to go and be trained in England, he was an avid music lover. and had even retained a full-time Mirasi practitioner to teach us children the intricacies of classical music. And so he wanted all his 9 children to learn classical music, and it was through the Mirasi employed at home that they learned this classical music. And he says the Mirasi used to stay in our house. Father would pay him 25 to 30 rupees and take care of his food. So he would say, usne baith jana harmonium leke. And he said, we didn't know there were so many shades of ah. So in this also we see how the Mirasis were, they were kind of, they had the knowledge of rag based music. They could teach rag and classical music. So it's not this idea of folk versus classical is also very much broken with a group like the Mirasis. And in the next slide, we see the website of the Noora sisters, who are India's most famous example of Mirasis today. And this is their website from 2019. And this is no, I'm glad I took a screenshot because on the website it says they follow the Sham Chaurasi Gharana, which is a classical lineage of Punjab, and the Mirasi traditions of music. So there is an open and proud claiming of their Mirasi heritage because their grandmother or great grandmother, I think, was Bibi Noora. But today it says they just follow the Sham Chaurasi Gharana and they are Sufi musicians. So now it's turned to Sufi because it's Bollywood and globally more acceptable. So there's this hiding. But if we see the next slide, there are attempts, whether in Pakistan or especially in Pakistan, where we will see that there is the larger chunk of Punjabi Muslims who migrated at 47. People like Arib Azhar have been saying, they've been saying that they received insults from people saying you're being a musician, even though you come from an educated family, you're doing the work of a Mirasi. And he said that I'm flattered that you called me a Mirasi. So he's again sort of questioning the negative connotation. And we'll end the lecture with a nice video from 2 musicians from 2019. Zoneb Zahid. So if we can see the first, this is just for some fun, and we can analyze the 2 videos and see what you think of each. This is the original version.
कोई वो देख मराठी
ओ नहीं रे, आजकल इन्होंने अपना नाम आर्टिस्ट रखा हुआ है।
होंद वेख मैं ते बाजे तबले देवी मैं तेरी के सारे लबले पैदा होंद वेख मैं ते बाजे तबले देवी मैं तेरी के सारे लबले उठता है जमाना कहता है कराना ते किन्ना है बुराना ते गाना क्यों नहीं गाना
The next and I want to see it both just to see the contrast. Both songs use the same tone or the melody, but we can discuss it.
जे आंदे असी तबले शबले वेखे तूतियां ते नाल नाल वाजे वजदे वेखे लोकी मैनू कहंदे बेटे बन ना सटारे सिक्खिया मैं वाजा फिर सिक्खिया गिटार क्योंकि मैं मेरा सी मेरा प्यो Mirasi mera dada, mirasi appa sare, mirasi.
So if we go to the next slide, I've got translations of the second video because it did not have subtitles. So if you see the next slide, um, I think you'll have to go to the left side if you go, that way. Yeah. So it says, we come into the world surrounded by table and other instruments. Tutiyan te naal naal vaje vajde vekhe. Along with flutes, we also saw harmoniums being played. Loki menu kende bete banna sitare. People tell me, son, you must become a star. So I learned the harmonium and then I learned the guitar because I'm a Mirasi. My father Mirasi, grandfather Mirasi. Oh, we're all of us Mirasis. And I think we can, see the next slide where one of the paragraphs in the song, he says, Khan Saba de naal sadi bachpane di yari. Our friendship with the Khan Sahibs or the elites goes back to childhood. Ga ga ke thak gaya Pairvi Darbari.
Arey wah.
We tire of singing Rag Bhairvi and Rag Darbari. And this video is set in Androon, Lahore, so in like the old walled city of Lahore. Androon de vich ਅਸੀਂ ਪਾਏ ਨੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਡੇਰੇ. Inside the walled city, we've built our homes. ਸਰਗਮਾਂ ਦੇ ਪਲਟੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਯਾਦ ਹਨ ਬਥੇਰੇ. And we remember all the melodic ornamentations of the sargam. So I think we can go forward to the next slide and skip the next slide actually. And I think in the first video, I think we can skip this. So in the first video, which is Zoneb Zahid's video, the railway track symbolizes a journey the musicians have made from their Mirasi origins as practitioners of a rooted Punjabi folk or Hindustani classical music to a more westernized identity. The radically modern sartorial choices in clothes and the Western rock pop feel of the song embody a clean break from the traditions they have left behind. The second version, Hassan Nawaz's, on the other hand, actively embraces the traditions of his ancestors, celebrating them openly. At one point, we see him sitting next to one of his, I think, father or uncle who's playing the harmonium. There are other clues in the rest of the video. So while his song is broadly Western and musically very similar to Zoneb's original version, it is different in that it is more lyrical with greater emphasis on the sung words of the composition rather than the instrumental sections of the song, as is the case with the former. In terms of appearance, Zoneb's modern chic, Nawaz represents what could be termed Desi cool, where he contrasts himself from the world of his Pio and Dada, while simultaneously celebrating their struggle to survive as musicians. So he actively he advocates continuity with tradition through reclamation of the metaphor of khidmat or serving the elders of the community. Khidmat, a term normally used by Mirasis for servicing upper caste patrons, is being overturned here to refer to an intergenerational divide. So these videos connect to the Mirasinamah. If we click enter, I just want to contrast the present with the past. They connect with the Mirasinamah on two levels. Both the videos and the Mirasinamah exemplify the gradation of social class within Mirasi community itself. Secondly, both showcase a dialogue with modernity. In the case of Mirasinamah, with British colonial rulers and Christian missionary educators, but also with city-based upper caste Indian middle-class anglicized music reformers, music nationalists, and North abolitionists. And of course, the Mirasis themselves. In the case of Zoneb and Nawaz in the present, the dialogue takes place with anglicized urban upper-class audiences, evident in the use of the English language on globalized platforms like YouTube, Spotify. And, in the second video, we saw there was a whole preface which was saying, reclaiming the term Mirasi, we are all Mirasi. I forgot to mention the term Mirasi comes from the Arabic term miras, which means heritage. So everyone has a certain miras and everyone is a Mirasi. And so in the current videos, there is an identification with Western pop music as the vehicle of breaking, either breaking or engaging with tradition. So I'll stop there. I think I've overshot my time by at least 10, 12 minutes. Thank you so much, Ravikant.
Thank you, Radha.
Thank you, sir.
So before I invite questions from the house, I have certain questions, in fact, about especially Mirasinamah and Mirasis. First, if we talk about Mirasis, not just in Punjab, but throughout North India, Mirasi's main occupation, other than genealogists, has been the musical accompaniment. And especially Mirasis are famous for playing sarangi. They are the instrumental accompanists. They play melodic instruments.
Yeah.
And with regard to training the conjuries or the dancing girls, it's a well-known fact that the women musicians didn't have any access to the Ustadi Talim. Rather, they used to learn from sarangi players.
Hmm.
So Mirasis used to be their teachers.
Hmm. Hmm.
I was just curious to know
Hmm.
2-3 things
Hmm.
from this Mirasinamah text.
Hmm.
A, what does the text say about Mirasins?
Hmm.
Because we all know that Shikha has made a wonderful film on Mirasins of Malerkotla, Born to Sing.
Hmm.
B, what does it talk about the musical repertoire of Mirasis?
Hmm.
And C,
Hmm.
it would be better if we think about this compound of Dome and Mirasi.
Hmm.
Because whatever I know a little bit, domes throughout North India, right from Punjab to Uttarakhand and all, domes are those who play percussive instruments.
Hmm.
जो ढोल पीटते हैं, जो कमड़ा पीटते हैं, वो डोम. हाँ, खास तौर पे अगर आप पहाड़ में जाएंगे उत्तराखंड में, तो ढोल बजाने का काम डोम का है. तो क्या do we find any kind of mentions in either the colonial ethnographic sources or the sources which you have consulted about the musical kind of accompaniment of domes?
Yeah.
So
I'll address the last question first. I haven't found there's not enough about domes in the text and about their the domes percussive instruments, but there is reference to the instruments that the Mirasis teach their children. So at one point he says that he notes with disappointment that the children of the Mirasis remain illiterate because they have been born at the home of, in a previous paragraph he calls them wolf-like. So he says, औलाद अपनी फिर पढ़न न पान, जांदियां भेड़े पासे लान. Because they have been born. Sorry, not jamdiyan. Sorry, I'm sorry. Jamdiyan bhede paase laan. Huh? So their children are unable to study because they've been born to wolves. And next line is tabal sarangi rag sikhan.
नहीं, एक मिनट, ये ट्रांसलेशन है, इसको थोड़ा सा हमें रिव्यू करना पड़ेगा.
जी.
क्या है?
औलाद अपनी फिर पढ़न न पान.
They do not get their children enrolled in the schools.
Right.
पढ़न न पान.
पढ़न न पान, yeah. Because jamdeya bhede paase laan.
Jamdeya pede paase pan.
हाँ,
They, as they take birth or as they are born, they engage them in adverse kind of things.
Yeah.
Pede, not
This
bede.
is the problem with translation, I think, because it's
Peda is bad.
this is the I know. Yeah, but also he's talking about wolves in he's talking about these animals as well in the previous section. So it's difficult to see if it's pede kam ya fir
Padai kam.
bhed, like that. So, and then he says, inko ye tabal sarangi rag sikha. So this is not the way to be educated. And next line is hujjat bazi ate kalan. So these hujjat bazi is also a skill.
Argumentativeness.
Yeah. So that is, so there is reference to these. Sarangi is mentioned along with tabla and rag. So there is that reference. The other question was about women, and people like Fawzia Saeed in Pakistan who have interviewed women in the red light district and the Mirasis who teach them music. Everywhere there is this sense that Mirasi women are not allowed to, or not, it's not preferred that they go out to perform. Perhaps only, as Shikha's film shows, only at like weddings or family, smaller intimate events. So in one text, at one point in the text, he suggests that the Mirasis are shamefully brought their own women to establish sexual ties with patrons, masters, in order to strengthen their bonds and status. So he says, Ranna dabhi avan javan, kare unande cha banavan, unandi cha banavan. O bhi jana roz padavan, holi holi akh ladan. So they have prostituted their own women. And then he says, Sharam karo kuch behayavon, aurtan nu is kam na lao, bande bano te ghairat khao. So this is, the kind of idea around how he claims that they're doing this with their own women. So,
but this is very interesting that they send their wives to perform domestic chores. Cha banavan.
Ye cha banavan, or is this cha banavan? This is the thing, like what is happening. But it's also sexual, na?
वो फिर आंख लड़ा चाय
और फिर
बनाने
चाय
से
बनाने से अख लड़ान, अख भी लड़ रही है चा दे नाल नाल. अख लड़ान. So it's a fantastic text. I need to do more around. But thank you so much for these insights about percussion and dome and.
One more thing.
Yes.
That not only there are Muslim Mirasis, but there is a particular Sikh community of Mirasis, which are known as Bodals.
Okay.
And Bodals perform devotional Sikh Kirtan.
Okay. Okay. I don't know. The problem with my work is it's all colonial period and it's not based in ethnography. So,
and Bodals are, by the way, famous for their Bakaratan. Bakaratan.
How does it go?
Hey, it is said that they consume a lot of meat, and when they sit to sing after that,
the Bakra will sing through. Okay. So, H.A. Rose, who was a colonial civil servant, he had a glossary of tribes and castes, and he noted a very valuable kavit, which notes the role of Mirasis for all different Punjabi classes and communities. So he says, गुनियन के सागर हैं, जात के उजागर हैं, भिखारी बादशाहों के, परभों के मिरासी, सिंहों के रबाबी, कव्वाल पीरजादों के, सभी हमें जानत हैं, डोम मालजादों के. So again, who is a dome, who is a Mirasi? So this is a kabit from collected from the Mirasis. So yeah.
Questions are invited, please.
A very basic question, and it's just in terms of, have your sources turned up for the 19th century? Any kind of sense that the Mirasis were, apart from doing the singing and the performing and so on and so forth, are they also tuning their own instruments? Are they, like, they may be training in teaching of how to play the instrument, but anything's on repairs, any sort of the makings of part, playing around with any of these, if there is anything. It's just very basic question.
There is a source which looks at different like materials and objects. So there is something on, there is a whole section on instruments, which I did not study because that was just too much. I couldn't. But I don't know enough. No, I'm sure there would be. I think I just this source was
वैसे
enough
भी
to write a whole
It is
chapter.
taken
on.
as a quality if an instrument player knows the intricacies of making and repairing his or her instrument.
Right.
तो ये कोई नई बात नहीं, ये सिखाया ही जाता है.
Yeah. I think wo hoga in the colonial glossaries and the that gazetteer kind of stuff there would be. Yeah, yeah. But I haven't paid attention. But it's a great thing to go back to. Thank you. No, it's great. No, it's a lovely question. So sadly, I don't know enough. Does the research also look at the sympathies being invoked by such songs to carry out the great project of conversion to whitewash the heritage of slave trade by Muslims? Sorry, I'll have to see the question again. Luckily, I got my glasses made yesterday, so I can actually read it. So look at it. No, it doesn't. I don't think so. There's no mention of slave trade. No.
Yeah. So thanks so much. I mean, I wish I had read this text before I was making my film, or met you before I was making my film. So it was really taking me that. But I was just thinking of a couple of things, one, because you kept emphasizing, and I really, was thinking about that how they are a very fluid kind of a community, and how they're, not a homogeneous community. And how there is this, this whole thing about what the text is doing is this anxiety, because, this idea of classifying them or putting them in some kind of a neat package, which they refuse to, be
confined to.
Yeah, confined to. And that's a constant kind of a way in which that is coming up, which is very, very interesting. And in terms of religious identity, in terms of the patrons, the kind of patrons they have, in terms of the kind of services that they perform for their patrons, very, very different kinds of, like one of the things which I don't know at that time, but in the work that I was doing, is that they were the ones who used to sadda dena, shadi mein
Yeah,
sadda dena,
absolutely. Yeah.
genealogy, dudh ka sadda dena, that marriage is taking place, so everybody has to give milk to the family, so those kind of things. And with that, related to that was this idea that the Mirasis were also informers. Informers or gossipers, or knowledge about family scandals, family, dark histories of family.
Yeah.
And that repository, which is where that that don't mess with the Mirasis.
Yeah. Knowledge.
करिए ना टीचर मराठी जात नो.
This is what I used to hear even at that time in Patiala, Malerkotla. All the Jats would say, we don't like to mess with them, because if we do that, then they can, insult us in front of our, families, and let out secrets.
Correct.
And, so this is something that I was wanting to ask you about, this fact, the fact that, and and this struck me, because at the end, this police constable, or, the author is saying, join the police. So
It's
join
very
the
interesting.
police,
Yeah.
because they also have this particular acumen, that they know so much about what is going on, who is meeting whom, who is having an affair with whom, and who is not, who is the son of this one and not that one, but even the lineage itself.
Yes.
So I just wanted
no, that's
to Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I think that's a really great insight, because I think this whole intelligence gathering angle is really interesting. One of the other Scottish missionary Mem Sahibs who learned music from a Mirasi, mentioned somewhere in her memoir that this musician was formerly in the police. Now he's left the police and come back to his earlier profession of being a Mirasi. So at least in that period, colonial period, it has probably started happening that they are also recruiting from communities like Mirasis and using also people like Muhammaduddin to therefore then police and, the surveillance of groups who are on the move and the suspicion of such groups. So it's interesting to see that the state is also using them. I mean, I'm thinking of Bailey's old article on empire and information and how between the before British rule and then after British rule, who were the runners and different groups who were used to gather information across the nodes of sort of the state and the empire. But there are references to, Mirasis being called to settle property disputes because they are the genealogists. So they know who this property belongs to, so they therefore also had power like in that context and,
Hmm.
It's a wonderful question. We have to go back and check. I mean, I really have no answer. But I'm sure if we find something in legal history archives, that'll be so cool. If you find that the Mirasis are being used as no this isko pata hai, isse पूछते हैं. Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, I got reminded of Dylan Robinson talking about how in sort of indigenous communities in Canada, right, where legal sort of legalities would traditionally in some of these indigenous communities be the domain of the singers and they would be sung. So laws would be sung and not. So I mean, it's a very
So that
different
is
sort
true.
of thing. So, but
the
that's
the
where-
wonderful Niladri Bhattacharya, who's taught us at CHS, he has in his book, there's a whole chapter on codifying custom. And he's talking about this relationship which administrators like James Wilson had, and how there was, I forget the name of the bard. And the bard has done some manufacturing of stuff which would appeal to the colonial scholar administrator. So in that, and they are looking for what local custom and law is. So the Mirasis are definitely seen as a source for that as well. And like Temple was, that's where, scholar administrators, they're administering the governing empire and trying to get, so definitely that angle is there. I think that's probably ripe for another PhD for someone to just look at the legal aspect. And I think, but Niladri's chapter in his new book has this. He looks at this. The other thing is that, that there are these concealment strategies that communities like the Mirasis are always suspicious of census and other officials from the state, and they would always obfuscate and make stories about their lineage or where they're from to avoid being captured. So that is the other more well-known. It's recorded by sociologists and anthropologists who've done ethnography in, say, 1990s Pakistan with communities like Mirasis. So that is something studied by Joseph Berland, I think. So that kind of thing has been noted. And Muhammaduddin also says that they keep making riddles and change the meaning of something. So, good at masters of obfuscation as well. So, yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, Radha. Sorry, I missed the beginning. So I don't know if you've talked about this, but more a clarificatory question. But I'm wondering, given this kind of a history, they or they
Obfuscate, yeah.
yeah, they confuse things, muddle
Yeah.
things, change identities, and the period you're talking about. Did the Mirasis fall into that whole criminal and denotified tribes kind of a paradigm? Or did they get into the Dramatic Performances Act that the colonial state uses to really target these performers and charge them of these things, spread information, take, carry secrets, change identities? And I'm particularly thinking because, say, Deepti Priya Mehrotra's work on Bedias, who perform Nautanki, tells us that there's a very close intersection that they have with these, right?
Yeah.
Women perform Nautanki because men are, criminalized.
Yeah.
Right, or they are put in jail under the Dramatic Performances Act, and so the genre changes to a more women-led genre, right? So, do you see something like this here? Because that's the exact, at least the later part of your period is that period.
Yeah.
And there is a policeman writing about
Yeah.
them in these ways already and colluding with the colonial state. So, thus I'm wondering.
So I should start with a disclaimer, which is that like each chapter of my book could be a separate thing. So the period that it mentions, so like it starts with 1800s, but it starts with just that 1800 period is just Ranjit Singh's court. Then you move to the mid 19th century. There I'm looking at the missionaries, and so the Mirasis till the 1890s. Then it comes to middle classes, and the later period is just on Patiala and Kapurthala. So as a result, I know little bit of the whole region, little bit, but so I haven't focused so strongly. So I mean, I can't give you a definite answer, but my sense is that the Mirasis were not targeted as much as some of the other more itinerant communities. They were not so much on the move as some of the other groups were. Because they was, kind of settled in villages and had to service. So they had stronger ties keeping them. But at the same time, that element is there. They could, that idea of being malleable, and they can, flight at the risk of being persecuted, they can uproot themselves and go. So I think the Mirasis are not very mobile, like say the Banjaras or the Nautanki groups you're talking about, but they are somewhere on that spectrum. But I don't think they were denotified or in the way some of the other groups were.
My name is Harinder. I'm from JNU. So my question is regarding in reference to Guru Nanak. So Guru Nanak's closest comrade Mardana, he was Mirasi.
Yeah.
So and a lot of Mirasis now relate themselves with Mardana.
Yes.
So I have two questions, and I would like you to answer from the same reference in colonial times. That one is about we saw many of the Mirasis who were performing during the farmer protests also recently. And so were there any instances in the colonial Punjab that they also joined some kinds of protest or some progressive movements like that? Second is related to Mardana only, that Mardana and Nanak, that are there any Mirasis that they take inspiration from Baba Nanak, or are they able to sing, or are they able to propagate the ideas of Baba Nanak with their performances? Thank you.
I think both are very good questions. Again, sadly, I wanted to look at protest and protest music, and especially with the anti-colonial struggles. I should have looked at it. I couldn't for reasons of time, but I'm sure there were. I mean, Madan Gopal Singh says that the whole Jugni genre has emerged from two Punjabi men who were musically inclined. Now, God knows what their caste was, or one of them was Mirasi, following the Jubilee torch of Queen Victoria's whatever celebration of whichever year she had reached. And so they were critiquing Jubilee and it became Jugni. So I don't know. That's the thought that came to mind, the example. But in terms of Bhai Mardana and Baba Nanak, there is a family of musicians who are in Lahore and with branches in the UK whom I've met, who claim their lineage back to Bhai Mardana, and they performed also at the court of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. They were employed as the Rababis there. So again, when it comes to religious music, Sikh liturgical music, the Mirasis can be called Rababis. And there the connection with the instrument is strong. And, Daniel Newman, who is the ethnomusicologist of Delhi, he had said that, and many others who've looked at colonial censuses across North India have said that the term Mirasi is a 19th century thing. Before that, they were called Dhadis. Or, there were other terms used, but the term Mirasi becomes popular, in fact, in some ways as a response to the colonial censuses even. It's not like it wasn't there before, but it becomes a more catch-all term. And this idea that Mirasis are accompanists also crystallizes fairly recently, according to Newman. The same community could have been called Dhadis earlier, but this idea is, and that's connected also to the fact that the gharanas are a post 1857. The way we have gharanas today goes back to post 1857 migration of musicians outside Delhi to the different smaller courts, and then how things emerged with music. But so the Mirasis who say we have a lineage back to Bhai Mardana would be more in the Rababi tradition. And partition had a lot to do with impacting that tradition negatively. There have been many communities of Rababis like Bhai Chand in Lahore, and many of them were not able to, because of partition, perform anymore at the Golden Temple and things like that. And many who stayed on in India converted to Sikhism or hid their whatever Muslim identity as well. So there is that story which is different. But yeah. Okay, first one. So there is also a debate about the community being called Mirasi or Mirasan. I think this might be a question for Shikha as well. And as it is stated, it can never be called a Mirasan community, as a community will never be represented by women's identity. Sure, yeah. Sad, but perhaps true. Though the tradition was passed on from mothers to their daughters and represented a matrilineal system of operation, unfortunately, the public spaces of Mirasans have also been taken over by their men, and the Mirasans' tradition of singing has almost collapsed. So there is a strong politics of identity and representation within Mirasis also. Please reflect. Well, I mean, I'd ask you to reflect because this is something you know more about. It's really great insight. Thank you, Aman. If you can share more about it, you're most welcome to. If you want to unmute and say something. Aman Mohammadi ji. Yeah, Hanji. Allowed to talk. Would you like to share something more about that, Aman?
Yeah, hi,
Hi.
I'm Aman.
Hi.
And I'm working on Mirasi community as my PhD from JNU.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
Yeah, Shikha Jingun ma'am already, I think, is aware about that because I kind of talked to her about it. So yeah, I am actually looking at the Mirasins of Punjab, and I have come across one of the last existing troops of Mirasins. She's Imrana, and she sings along with her troop, which includes her sisters and cousins, etc.
Right.
Unfortunately, they're on the verge of like their tradition because it's not supported by any means, etc. And I also went to Rajasthan where I came across the Mirasi, who were actually a group of men singing. And when encountered upon like, why aren't there any women? And they say, no, our women don't perform and they remain within the houses. They used to perform at some point, but now there is nothing as such.
Mm.
So when I also talked to Imrana ji in Lucknow, and she said that these spaces have been occupied, like radios and Qawwali and all these spaces have been occupied by men.
Mm.
And also I read this text, which is Dalit Bharat Ke Dalit Musalman, in which this politics about the identity and representation came across.
Mm.
So I was very intrigued by it because this whole lineage has been passed on from mothers to daughters, and then mother-in-laws to daughter-in-laws.
Mm.
But no, now nobody wants to kind of continue with this tradition because, of course, there is no support, there's no finances associated with it.
Mm.
So I'm trying to kind of revive this form through my work and kind of, want to write about it.
Mm.
The only thing is that because there is no trace of these Mirasins apart from these very minimal, spaces that I've found, and they're also staying at the very outskirts of Lucknow. So my whole idea was that how can we look at this politics of identity within the Mirasi community?
Mm.
Because in spaces like Punjab and in Rajasthan, these are the societies, these are the communities which are highly and exclusively, even the videos that you showed had a representation of men.
Yeah.
So these are the spaces which have been taken over by men,
Mm.
which was actually not the case, because they were the Mirasis who were singing for their patrons in mehfils and shadis and childbirth, etc. Even Imrao Jan had a little there is a little hum by the Mirasi
Mm.
of Lucknow.
Mhm.
So then how does one look at in today's time? How does one relocate or revisit this whole politics of identity is something that I'm struggling with. And how does one trace this history, this lineage? Yeah.
It's a very difficult question, and it's really nice that you're doing this work, because obviously the more common way of tracing women as performers is through tawaif and courtesan and dancing girl communities. So it's really nice to hear that there is a live tradition of mirasans. I would love to read your thesis when it's ready. It sounds great. I unfortunately don't know enough about, I haven't, perhaps as I said, I haven't looked well enough to look for traces of Mirasan. So, I don't want to say a cliche that, men write history. So the sources, of course, will show us more male kind of dominated representations. I think it differs. Like your Imrana ji is in Lucknow, but the Mirasis of Rajasthan have perhaps turned more conservative. This is something which is noted across North India and Pakistan, that there is a greater restriction on women in musician families. I guess there's always been, and it depends on which community of musician you belong to. So I think Mirasis would often the kind of boundary would blur with Kanjri, as we've seen in this text. And perhaps there was greater policing from Mirasi men to disallow their women from taking on a sort of dancing girl or Kanjri connotation. So there are plenty reasons to locate this. I would suggest you perhaps could look at Fauzia Saeed's, you probably have already read her book Taboo, which looks at Hira Mandi, where the connection between the dancers and the Mirasis is seen. And in that context as well, so like Rajasthan, the Mirasi men have said that we don't let our women perform. And I think perhaps you could just make the argument that because there is this insistence that our women should not perform, it shows you that, in fact, like Imrana ji, there must have been many other Mirasans who did perform and, carried the tradition on. So I'm sorry I don't have clues from my own research. And I could have shared the Noora sisters. They are the Bibi Noora, I think, is something you can research. Since the Noora sisters are so popular and so big now, that's the reason I didn't share a video of theirs. But not to exclude women consciously. So please, maybe someone needs to, I don't know if there has been some PhD done on the Noora family. There really needs to be something, because Bibi Noora has left a lot of records which are still available from Voice of India and other places. So that is a very strong matrilineal tradition right there from grandmother to granddaughter. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
If I'm allowed to supplement, Sabah Diwan in her book Tawaif-Nama writes a detailed chapter of various categories of Tawaifs. And in that she mentions Mirasins also.
Could you tell that name again, please?
There is a book by Sabah Diwan, Tawaif-Nama.
Tawaif Nama, Sabah Diwan. Okay, can I?
And just if I can just add also, because Naresh sir also mentioned about Doomnis, and my work is on marginalized Muslim performing communities, which includes both Mirasan and Doomnis. So yeah, and that's the history which kind of conflicts, because then there is this thin trajectories about where one can locate them, because the first mention of Doomni comes in Naval's book of the Nauticals of the Raj, in which he mentions how with the coming of the Mughals they brought in these performers, among which were Doomnis also. But also when we trace back to the Tawaif culture, we also find mentions of Doomnis, or maybe the downfall culture of the Tawaifs led to a community called Doomnis. And this also merged with the Mirasi community. So this is very interesting because in different contexts, we find different references of their origins. So yeah, I just wanted to reflect on that too.
Great, thank you.
Okay, can I? I'm, because there's already the internet and the web and the Nuran sisters, so there are, traces of media memory as far as Mirasi community is concerned, whether men or women. I think there would be, I'm speculating completely. I know I want to comment. There would be a kind of division of labor because, there are certain functions of, about genealogies, about, also functions of bhand, right? Laughter is very much present there. So if there is a street performance, right, it's more about, men being the witness there, right, as well as the audience, right? So they are there. And if it is a social, domestic kind of performance, right, the chance is that the women are performing those functions. I mean, that's my guess. All these things, right? I mean, there's always an attack, and not just in Punjab, but also, and the attack continues for such a long time, right? Cinema also is attacked precisely because it's seen as a suspect space where women from, suspect lineages are coming to perform. And the idea is the Hindu middle class and the Hindi reformists are trying to reform cinema as well. And once it gets reformed, then you occupy it, right? It becomes respectable for your own usage, as it were. You can install yourself in a space that is not installable right now. So with the passage of time, right? And it happens with Holi, Anil Sethi's work, Jyotirmoy Khatri's work, right? In Punjab and Holi. So a whole lot of things get a bad name, and they need to be reformed before they can be actually embraced, etc., etc. So all these, there's a thicker story there, obviously. But thanks for mapping the musical scene of Punjab out. And these are various chapters, and there would be deeper connections, I suppose. One more space, therefore, to look at would be to, apart from gramophone records, also cinema. If you look at the early Pakistani films, for example, right, it's the presence of quote unquote low caste women, right? I'm guessing their caste. It's not mentioned, but you don't have to read caste only in the surnames. You have to also look at the houses. You also have to look at their relationship with the rest of the society and the community, etc., etc. So if you look at a film like Mausikar in Pakistan, if you look at a film like Basant in India, right, so many itinerant singers
Hmm.
who make it big in the theater scene.
Hmm.
And these are the narratives
Hmm.
that are actually filmed to begin with.
Yeah.
right?
Traveling
And yeah,
performers.
early historians, film historians have tried to,
Huh.
give us some sense of that.
Yeah.
So this film history is trying to capture that as well.
Yes.
So, and just as we have
That's
in
so interesting.
print,
Yeah.
print and pleasure, right?
Yes.
The two-sided, thing which you also very well actually demonstrate, that reform is not only about reforming the society, it's also for pleasure. Right?
Hmm.
So the print, which Francesca Orsini is
Yeah.
discussing, right,
Yeah.
would have all these things.
Yeah.
And so a wonderful and very nuanced picture of the Mirasi community. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
think we can add several layers of media memory to it
Yeah.
and continue the story. Thanks a
Yeah.
lot for opening
Thank
it
you
up.
for that great comment. May I just say one little thing? I think, you mentioned the itinerant mobile performers in these movies, and especially women. When going back to the previous comment, we are currently editing a journal special issue on the traveling female performer. And one of the contributors is from JNU, I think, Tanya Burman. I don't know which center she is in, but she is looking at different categories of different female performers. So maybe Aman might be interested in reaching out to Tanya Burman. And we are looking at an essay which looks at different names for these different kinds of women. And when you mentioned the film space, this idea that actresses could be seen as prostitutes and they had to constantly uh, carve out a space of respectability, and then caste also comes into play. And all these spaces were for men used to cross dress as women earlier on the stage, and then so it's a really to see women in these spaces, as you said, domestic and public. It's a really interesting one. I mean, Anshu Malhotra's work on gender also shows us that women of all communities could do a siapa or a mourning ritual together, and this was this was a pleasure. I mean, it's a sad thing, but you're dealing with grief through a very tactile, physical, and through singing. And in some ways, there is pleasure in grieving together as a community. And this is something which is being attacked by the reformers who don't like the intercaste mingling. So those spaces where women could be public is being policed. And I think your thing of public private is so interesting, because one of the most interesting things I found in my research, which is mentioned in the book, is Tawaif and dancing girl at Sufi shrines or at popular devotional shrines in Punjab. And this is as late as 1939-42, where in the archives I found a music at Muslim shrines bill where they wanted to outlaw any dancing girls in Sufi shrines. And then the debates are between these Muslim scholars saying, but then we should ban all music. Why is men singing okay, but women singing not okay? And then they're saying we should ban it in a radius around the Sufi shrine. But then they said, oh, आसपास घर है, लोगों को शादियों पे, on births, they want to call the dancing girls to sing. That should be allowed. It's in your space of your home. But in a public Sufi shrine kind of context, it's not good. So, but this was very popular. They were there, whether it's the Gulab Dasi Dera, as Anshu's work has shown, or it's in your Sakhi Sarwar shrine. You have courtesans singing and dancing as part of the milieu of they're also singing for devotional purposes. So this idea that they are just immoral and only sensual, but they're also sacred, involved in your devotional cultures as well. So yeah. Thank you.
So I don't have a question. Thank you for the very, very provocative lecture. But I have just a comment. So when you were talking about the text being the author's anxieties about being tied up to the contemporary wave of homogeneous living and all of that, and your videos, the 2 clips that you showed, they took me back to this song by Asrar. Asrar is a Pakistani singer.
Yes.
It's Chachi Masi. I'm sure you must have.
I haven't actually.
So it's the song is in the Potowari dialect of Punjabi, and it goes like Roni Chachi, Roni Masi, Shava da Munda, ya Pira da Munda, Hoya Mirasi, Marzi Mare Sore Alladi. And it goes on like that, and then he begins a rap. So the
rap moves to
the rap is like, and he abuses in the rap, and it's like a modern day Sufi poet, singer, writer, and he's singing, and he's reclaiming the space of the Mirasi, and it's shot in the Lahore metro, because you were talking about the train connection. So it's a very fascinating reclaiming of the Mirasi lineage by us. I'm assuming the cast of the singer. He has sung for Bollywood and popular in Pakistani realm, but I'm assuming that he says that Pira da Munda, Shama da Munda, obviously upper caste, coming from a very pious lineage, and turning into a Mirasi, and then how women of his family are crying and buying the rolla and siapa, and the song goes on like that.
So interesting. Yeah.
So so also there is a rise of underground rap musicians from low caste communities coming out in South Asia, not just India. So what is this connection between this is popular the realm of the Mirasis, if we are really tracing this lineage, the pop music as the realm of the Mirasis? Is there a connection there? And if and that's how people from other communities, singers and artists, kind of appropriating that lineage.
I don't think so, not enough. Because at least in the Punjabi pop music, all about jat, jat, jat.
Yes, no, but very few. In the periphery, it has been happening,
and you have Chamar pop in Punjab.
Yes,
Stranger Chamar. But again, it's the thing is that I think Kunal Duggal is doing very good work on caste in cinema, and he says many of these big Bollywood names, they might have low caste origins, but they will not talk about their low caste origins, whether whoever it might be. There are many like Shailendra the lyricist was not hiding it way back, but was he? Never made it. This is the thing. He had other, but this is very interesting. So I think not enough. Maybe more has to be. It would be great if everyone embraced, like they're saying, "Main Mirasi, we appa sare Mirasi." It would be nice. I mean, but that is also appropriation. I see what you're saying, but yeah.
So Asrar's another song is called Chatta, and it's shot in Androon Lahore, and the video is Chatta Paiya Teen Diya, Sadra Rekho Jeen Diya.
Yes.
It's also that.
Yes. Asrar fan. No? Okay.
Just very curious about
it. Yeah. No, it's and there are so many more. I think maybe more in Pakistan. Because in India there are very few examples. I'm sure Naresh ji can tell us more about the pop music and Mirasis in India and Indian Punjab.
I have no clear-cut answer about this.
Okay.
I won't comment until and unless I am sure.
Yeah. It's really interesting. Lots to be Thank you for such a great question. Yeah. Oh, wonderful.
So my thought is somewhat related to the question of that guy from JNU. So it was like that whenever we listen about the term Mirasi, we used to have a negative image of them, like as that girl used the term hijras and all, right? But on the other hand, when we see this word in the term of Pai Mardana ji, the one with Guru Nanak, we used to give him the respect same as we give to the Guru Sahibs.
Right.
So what the image is actually about, we are just specifying it from their activities, or we are considering their society background to specify that word?
I mean, I think Bhai Mardana is considered okay because he's joined the, he's in a sense legitimized by being the companion of Guru Nanak. So that is, it's because you are in the Sikh tradition and, so it's pious and there's a devotional respect there. But in the reality couldn't be further from the truth. But songs like Mirasi and all the, Chamar pop and things like that, which are claiming the caste status not as a thing to be ashamed of, and, reclaiming the meaning of the term and saying Mirasi means inheritor. So everyone is an inheritor. And even similarly with Chamar pop, I think Ginni Mahi has said something that Chamar means something, therefore. So I think that is a very modern thing and a modern assertion of saying, we are not ashamed, and we will claim it and we'll reinvent it. And, so this idea of modern respectability. So I think that's an ongoing project, but yeah, I don't know what else to say. Thank you.
One thing more to add, if we closely look at the oral lore related to Bhai Mardana, so many of the negative things are associated with Bhai Mardana while discussing Guru Nanak's Udasis. Like if we talk about Gurdwara Reetha Sahab, so it is associated with Mardana's hunger. And Guru Nanak warned him that as much as he wants to eat, he should, but he should not pack those Reethas. Though it is associated with Mardana's greed.
Yeah.
And तो वो नेगेटिव कॉनोटेशंस कहीं जाते नहीं है, वो कहीं ना कहीं रहते हैं.
हाँ. और मुझे एक और बात याद आ गई, but I think I should keep quiet after that. कि जब Mirasis recount their own origin story, it's often that we were higher caste, and then one of our ancestors was duped into doing something like working with leather or doing something which has a lower caste connotation, and uske baad we have become lower caste. So there's always a story where originally they were either Rajput or some higher caste, Brahmin, and then it changes. So there is also, this is a common trope which many people have noted. Yeah.
Those of you who are interested, we have only 2 copies of Radha's book.
Yes, which I'm selling at a discount. Yeah, it's available sadly for like 1800, but I bought it myself. I had to buy it for 1300 rupees, so I will sell it for 1300. Sure, thank you. Yes, okay, done. Sold. Oh, you have a question? Okay. My greed knows no bounds.
Yeah, hi, I'm Tarana. I'm in 12th right now. I'm quite new to this. I was looking up the term Mirasi, and of course, it comes with a negative connotation. You know, it is a way, this is slang, it is an abuse heard, and I'm so glad the way she just brought that down and just made that very clear. In the Mirasinamah, there is, so I just recently did my history project on intersectional feminism with view on Dr. Baba Sahib. And something that he writes about is in a society wherein honor is given to people based on where their caste ranking is, caste-based anxiety prevails, right? And it kind of materializes in his concept of purity, because that is what the caste system is based on, purity, pollution. So the Mirasinamah, something that I see very evidently is they're essentially Muslims, right? And when you search it up right now on Google, they will say that Mirasis are people who observe Islam, but their beliefs are tainted with Hindu origins or so, right? But I think that as a community, which is especially like, in music, performing, bards, I think art is something which cannot stem from just one root. There is a lot of intersectionality that comes in there. There's a lot of intermixing conversations that need to take a place. And even no matter how small a community is, even though it may be guarded so as to protect itself and to grow, it has to, it has to be permeable. If a modern day Mirasi was sitting here in this seminar with you, and was going over the Mirasinamah with you, and it was someone who was was also very familiar with intersectionalism and how it is very important for communities to grow, thrive, and reach forth, how do you think they would respond to what the Mirasinamah says in today's light?
Well, I'm sure it would make them very angry, and I think perhaps if they follow the tradition of wit and humor, they would also find it humorous. But yeah, I hope that it would appeal to them and to say and to see how it is changing. So that's a really great intervention. Thank you. In fact, some of the first people to sing at Arya Samaj Bhajan gatherings in 1870s were Mirasis. And this British observer is saying, this is so un-Hindu to see these Muhammadan singers, you know, in the Bhajan Toli. But those were the communities who sang at that time. And later, 20 years later, they're saying Mirasis are bad. You know, the music is of the upper caste. So this kind of politics of music is, yeah. But thank you. What a great question. Thanks, Tarana.
I just wanted to share that when I heard this whole presentation and I heard you, I work as a counselor with children. And when we work in sessions with them, the adolescents, and we talk about transgender or about intersex or about inclusion, sometimes we don't have this richness of the literature to get them the feel of what it means to be a transgender or what it means to be somebody who's been outcast. So this was very powerful for me because when I go back to my children, the work I do, I may not have the elaborate text, but the feeling which you brought forward, that sentiment of speaking for justice of those who are not heard. And the children we work with, in class 6th, 7th, and 8th. And these days, children in class 7th ask, what's the difference between transgender and intersex, So it's like I have to educate myself also and to be the voice of those who are not heard. So I think it's very beautiful to see how much you brought here. So to know that inclusion is something which one can talk about openly and widely. And there are so many ways and methods available. I get very limited because I'm doing so many other things. And in between that, we talk about inclusion. Inclusion is just one agenda out of my 100 agendas with our children. And incidentally, there is so much of looking down for communities, not in the mainstream, even in class 4th level, 5th level. So we are looking at this going much downwards in younger levels now. With our children. So it will be really nice if children get a feel of what it means to be talking like this, And for me, it was like, this is how it opens up, like we got this exposure in college time and now, but bachas will pick it up.
It's getting,
so thanks.
Kids are getting more. So we should make it more accessible. Thank you. It should make a TikTok version of
They pick
this.
up faster.
Thank you.
So I think this discussion can go on, and we'll have to honor the time. So thank you, Radha, and thank you all who were present here, and thank you, thanks to those who joined us online.
Yes.
So we'll have some other time with Radha at CSTS.
Thank you, Professor Roy, for joining. Also, I can see Professor Kumkum Roy is online. Thank you so much for joining us. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Naresh, sir, for such a great discussion, and to Ravikant for hosting, and everyone for being here. Thanks.